So we'll just wait a little bit longer. Got a fair few people coming in. This session is also being live streamed to Facebook. So if anyone has any questions and they're watching on Facebook, they can pop it in the thread, and we will endeavour to get back to you on the forum, on the BVNA forum at the end. Okay, so I think we can start. Good evening, everybody. My name is Alex Taylor. I'm the Junior Vice President of the BVNA, and welcome to the third webinar or kind of Q&A session of 2021 from the BVNA. I've been really looking forward to this webinar. I think it goes without doubt to say that the last 10 months have been super challenging for all of us, and it's put a big strain on our mental health and well-being. And I think due to the caring nature of us veterinary nurses, we're really good at looking after each other, at looking after our peers, but we're not particularly good at looking after ourselves and practicing self-care. So this session is, you know, really needed this evening. I'm delighted to be joined by our BVNA President, Jo Oakden. Hi, Jo. And two fantastic guests, Katie Ford and Lisa Quigley. Jo and I are going to be sort of talking to Lisa and Katie about sort of hints and tips and coping strategies that nurses can apply to themselves during lockdown, and how we can just better practice self-care. We're also going to be talking to Lisa about the RCVS Mind Matters initiative and how it can help veterinary nurses during this quite sort of challenging and difficult time. So I'll just introduce our guests properly. I'll start with Katie Ford. I'm sure most of you know Katie. Katie graduated with distinction from the University of Liverpool in 2012. Since then, she's continued to work in small animal first opinion, gaining her RCVS certificate in internal medicine in 2017. Realising the power of preventative mindset strategies. That's quite difficult to say, Katie.
Sorry, I apologise.
Through her career and journey, she trained as a coach and now teaches other professionals how to use these techniques to thrive in the veterinary world. She regularly helps individuals and companies on topics such as gratitude, self-worth, and dealing with the dreaded imposter syndrome, which I know we've all had at one time or another. Our second guest is Lisa Quigley. Lisa is the Mind Matters Initiative Manager from the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, and Lisa is responsible for the day-to-day running of the Mind Matters Initiative, which seeks to address mental health and wellbeing issues in veterinary professionals or in the veterinary profession. And she's a background in mental health and previously worked at the South London and Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust, where she led on employment engagement and retention, working directly with individuals with mental health conditions. So that's the intro done for our guests this evening. I'll just mention, if anyone has any questions as we go along, if you can pop it into the Q&A box at the bottom, and Jo and I will try and sort of keep an eye on those, make a note, and we can ask those questions at the end when we've kind of been through the questions that we've got prepared. So Jo, can I pass over to you now for the first question? Is there anything you want to?
Well, we're just going to do a little intro into the things that are coming up this year, some sort of positive events that the BVNA have got coming up that everybody can get involved with. Two really exciting things: the launch of the BVNA anaesthetic pathways, the anaesthesia pathway, and that's launching with its first cohort in February. So that's really exciting. And also our next cohort for the oral care course is also launching in February. So if you've been waiting or been on the waiting list to get involved with that, then you can. It's starting again. We've also got VNAM coming up in May, which is a really important thing to be part of as a veterinary nurse. And I'm just going to share an infographic from last year so you can just see the reach that it had and how well that did and why it's so important to get involved. So that's all about Veterinary Nursing Awareness Month 2020. This year our theme is I'm a veterinary nurse and I'm human. So we want just to understand what that means and that we are people involved in this role as well, and the difficulties that we have to face in practice as well as the good things. And this is all going to be around the 4 pillars of sustainability, as sustainability is our theme for this year. So we're going to be looking at those different aspects within the different weeks. And there's of course going to be the competitions to get involved in. And we'll love your ideas on how you want to get involved and how you're spreading the word on veterinary nursing. So look out for that one. That's going to start, things are going to start coming out with that ready to go for May as well. And then the other last thing is just a little bit of information that the legislation working party consultation has been extended until April. So that means you've still got time to get your voices heard. And your opinion does matter. Your individual opinion can be put into this consultation. So BVNA are representing you and nurses' voices on that, but this is something that your individual voices can be heard on as well. So please have a look at that. If you're struggling to find it, you can email anybody at the BVNA and we can send you the link, but it's also on the RCVS website. So that's quite a few sort of positive things to look at that are coming up this year as well, before we move into questions. So I guess that where we should start is kind of where we're at now in practice and what we're dealing with. So work feels pretty intense at the moment, and it doesn't feel like there has been any let up for the past 10 months. In fact, it feels like it's getting busier, and I don't really know where the patients are coming from. And like we were saying off camera, there seem to be so much more sick patients than I think we've sort of ever seen before, and where are they coming from? But with that, we have a lot of moral and compassion fatigue, and we're just faced with it every day, and it's exhausting and draining. Do you have any coping strategies for dealing with moral and compassion fatigue in practice at the moment?
I'm happy going first on this one, if you're happy with that, Lisa. So I think I'd start with saying and just acknowledging that everybody is unique. These last few months, well, last 10 months now, were completely unpredicted. We've had so much thrown at us, let alone the normal sort of stresses and taxes of practice that we have to deal with. And you know what, I'm here with you all in solidarity of the fact that, yeah, I've been there too, and I've had my own set of struggles previously. And we've just got to always acknowledge that some things are going to work for some people and other things are going to work for others too. But the 4 key things that I tried to focus on, and certainly looking at a lot that's out there as well, and from the training that I've done, are really important. And the first one would always be sort of self-value and self-kindness. And if all of you just take a few seconds to look at the amazing things that you do every day that we take for granted, like nurses are so highly skilled. Like at one point you maybe never thought you'd get in to be a nurse. At one point you never thought you'd pass your OSCEs, but you do it every day. You do fantastic things, and each of you has a totally unique journey. You're a completely valuable person aside from anything that's going on in the vet world or you being a nurse. And we've got to remember that we've got to treat ourselves as that person too. You know, we're highly trained, valuable, skilled people that deserve breaks, deserve rests, deserve time to recharge. That takes me on to sort of the second thing really is looking at how we're switching off from work too, because when it feels so intense, it's having like that conscious acknowledgement of how am I taking time to switch off from work. And for me personally, that had to be a very am I going to set a routine up? There's a good website called ProQual, which is the Professional Quality of Life website. They talk about making an end of work routine. So you're almost like psychologically disengaging yourself from work and saying, right, this is the end of work now. And for some people that was maybe the journey home from work. It might be getting out of your uniform. It might be that you take a little bit of time and do some mindfulness or some meditation, and perhaps you write an end of day list and say, here are all the things that I need to do tomorrow, but I'm just going to leave them there, do a bit of a brain dump on that. And in terms of other things that you can look at, there's actually, without taking too much time here, but Professor Eleanor O'Connor, who's actually been involved with Mind Matters, she did a really good webinar for WellVet in December that's up to watch. It's like 45 minutes long, loads of bits about recovering from stresses of work and end of work routines. But she talks in much more detail there. But overall, it's looking at how do you as an individual relax? How do you disengage from work? Is it that you need to look at talking with people at work about communications out of work? Like, is it that actually having the work WhatsApp group is making you just think of work continuously. And that was one for me. I just spoke to my colleagues and said, look, I need to set a boundary in place for me and say in an evening, I really need to switch off from work. So I might not respond to messages, and just throwing it out there, and people respected that and they understood that once I'd explained that. And the other things would be just looking at, like, how can you embrace the other parts of you outside of work? How can you take control of your spare time and use it in a way that allows you to recharge? And again, an interesting point you'll see in Eleanor's lecture is actually she talks about the recovery paradox, where she says actually the more that we work, quite frequently the more recovery that we need, but putting those things first sometimes becomes harder. And that's when we need to make that choice to actually say, look, what's my self-care, which would be my third point. We're that valuable person, like all of you, every one of you on this webinar now is valuable and deserves to recharge. And us consciously thinking, like, what does that mean to me? Who could help me with that? And that would bring me on to like my fourth point, essentially, which would be talking. And when you've got those cases that are emotionally taxing, talking with colleagues about them, talking to friends about them, talking to employers about how they can help you more in that workplace if there's something that you're struggling with. And I guess they've been my four main points. Like I say, value yourself, try and create some sort of end of work routine, look at your self-care and what works for you as an individual. And then finally would be talk as much as we can, as whether that's with a professional, whether that's with work, whether that's with friends, and just, yeah, get those things out there. And I'm so pleased that we've got Lisa here as well, because Lisa's working with Mind Matters, which is a brilliant initiative, which is there to help as well. And as a mental health professional, I know she's going to have some gems to add in on top of my experiences there too.
Katie, I think just to kind of second everything that you've said there, I was going to direct people to the talk that Eleanor did as well. But I guess just to touch a bit, we talked about moral fatigue, and within Mind Matters, we're looking at that as well, sort of conceptualising it as moral injury, and that's something that we have made an award to a group of researchers over at King's College, and they won the Sarah Brown award this year, and they're going to be looking at moral injury and how that affects veterinary professionals, and it's just to sort of go over a little bit about what that actually is. So the way we're looking at moral injury, there's lots of different ways to talk about it, but in the context of this piece of research, we're looking at those situations where people are working, or due to COVID, due to sort of difficulties that they're under, they're being forced to work in ways that are kind of out with their moral code. And so that could be things like, you know, I'm not from the vet world myself, but I'm talking to a lot of professionals and hearing about, you know, euthanasias in car parks, those kinds of things, where through no fault of their own, veterinary professionals who are caregivers, who want to care, they're not able to perform and maybe to do things in the way that they would like. And what we're looking at is the way that that kind of can impact on individuals. So what we're seeing is that sometimes the symptoms of what we're calling moral injury, they can mirror in some ways PTSD, and that's not to pathologize it, because it is actually a very it's, you know, it's within the bounds of the normal human experience, so we're not describing it as an illness, but it's quite interesting that some of those symptoms that we're seeing in people that have suffered moral injury, we're seeing guilt, shame, worry, self-blame, and of course those are all the things that when we feel those feelings, they can kind of cause us to turn inwards. If you're feeling guilt and shame, those are kind of really personal feelings that sometimes stop us from seeking help and stop us from looking outwards. And so I guess the one thing I would say is that, like you say, Katie, talking, looking outwards, because I think talking about these things, it kind of helps them lose their power a little bit, doesn't it? If you're holding on to something, and the minute you say those words, it can be really freeing. So yeah, keep talking, and like you said, also try and find something that is not vet, something outside of vet. I think is really key, and that recovery from work is just absolutely crucial.
Thank you both. They're really good advice and some good direction pointed in there as well. I think something that ties into that, and certainly something that Alex and I have noticed recently, and also recognised that we've felt it ourselves and gone through it ourselves at different points in our career, is the burnout because we didn't recognise our own limits. So that self-awareness around what our capacity is, and that ability to say no, because you do get to a point in your career and in your profession where you suddenly have a lot of opportunities and you want to take them all at once because you feel you need to spread yourself amongst all of these things. But of course, there's only so much of us that we can give. So how do you have any sort of advice on how we can deal with that, and how we can sort of gain that self-awareness maybe a little bit earlier before we go through that burnout that we then have to sort of rebuild ourselves?
I think that's a really, really interesting point, Jo, definitely, especially on having that awareness piece for burnout, because for a lot of people, burnout seems to appear like being hit by a truck, like it's come out of nowhere. But actually, and I'm sure Lisa will agree, that burnout is something that builds up slowly, and that awareness piece is so important for that reason, that we do sometimes, and I think it's a profession-wide thing, and I was there at one point as well, of almost thinking that exhaustion was a normal part of being a vet or being in the industry. And we'll see memes going around on Facebook and things saying, if you're not exhausted, you're not doing it properly, and things which just add to the culture, which needs a big shift, a way to look at, you know what, how am I actually feeling today? Like, how like interested am I feeling in what I'm doing? How engaged am I? Like, how am I physically feeling? And they're just little things to look at in the beginning and be aware of. And I know Lisa will be able to come on to giving us some like symptoms and things to look out for burnout right in the beginning. But that would be my biggest piece of advice, would be, if you're listening to this now, pick up on those little things and then take, like we've talked about, some of those self-care actions, some of those how to actually switch off from work actions, because that's something that I certainly never did. I just thought, right, plow on, keep going. And then you're right, you try and do everything and you just run out of fuel, just like a car would do. You know, all the warning lights have been going off for however long, but you keep driving it and you keep going. And then eventually you think, why did it just explode on the side of the motorway? And actually all of those things have been going off the whole time. So Lisa, is there anything you'd add to that in terms of like what people can look out for, like at the really early stage?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's absolutely right. And I'm not going to say that you can't pour from an empty jug, because everybody's sick of hearing that. So just pretend I said it, but I'm not going to say it. But I guess one thing, I think sometimes burnout and compassion fatigue are kind of used interchangeably. So I guess one thing is to kind of think about how we differentiate them. And so compassion fatigue is what we get usually up in caring industries, where you're kind of on the receiving end of other people's trauma, harm, those kinds of things, and so they create sort of a lot of difficulties for people working in caring professions. Now, burnout isn't just for caring professions. It's something that you can experience in any role, and what we see quite a lot with burnout, it's not just tiredness or exhaustion, although that does come into it, but what you'll see with somebody that's burnt out is kind of starting to lose, I think, the joy that they feel from the work that they love. And so maybe starting to feel a little bit negative, a bit cynical, maybe just kind of a little bit kind of withdrawing from their colleagues, or from the good parts of the work that they love. And we all have days like that where we're sort of feeling a bit rubbish about everything, a bit cynical, a bit grumpy, which is absolutely fine. But if you are feeling like those days are kind of more often than not, and if you're feeling yourself kind of finding it harder to feel empathy with your colleagues, with your patients, your clients, you're starting to feel a little bit cynical about the job, and about what you know the job that you've usually loved. I think those are kind of really big red flags for burnout. So it's kind of a little bit more than just being exhausted, although that is a massive part of it. But those are kind of red flags to start looking at.
And one thing I was going to add to that as well, Lisa, I'd seen previously some of the work by, I think, one of the psychiatrists, Carl Jung, had looked at caregivers and had said that actually their biggest fear was feeling that they were being selfish. And I think that can sometimes come into us taking breaks. And I've seen that personally for me, is that I felt like me giving myself more time was me being selfish. But I think sometimes, I know personally for me, reframing that as, and again, I know the cliches and things of not being able to pour from empty jugs, but
it's
knowing
true,
that
isn't it?
it
We're
is
gonna have to
true.
stick with that one.
Yeah, because it's true. You know, if you giving yourself whichever time off that you almost feel selfish about having might actually mean that you can keep going and actually have fulfillment in that job and enjoy it and be more prepared to go further if we give ourselves some time to slow down, to speed up sometimes. And that's a lesson that took me a very long time to learn as well, but certainly it's a valuable one.
Yeah,
I was just wondering what advice you ladies might give to someone if you can recognise all of those signs in a colleague, but you can see that they're not taking that time to kind of have that, or they don't have that awareness to realise that that's kind of what's happening to them. What should someone do if they see that, do you think?
I think this is a good one for Lisa.
I think,
sorry, I just put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think sometimes the smallest things are the things that make the biggest difference. So, I get asked questions like this all the time. But sometimes it is really as simple as just, "Are you okay?" And ask the question. Quite often that question goes unasked. So ask it. You know, and then ask again, and again if you need to. So ask the question and maybe sort of take them outside of if you're working in practice, maybe find somewhere that's kind of neutral or outside the workplace to have a chat, but just kind of show that you're there for them. Try and think about ways that, you know, as a whole organisation, you can focus more on, you know, everybody's well-being. So maybe not kind of calling people out on, you know, you're looking really cynical today, or you've been really grumpy, or you burnt out, but just trying to show that you're there for that person. And also a really important thing is to model good self-care yourself, and it is such an important thing. And we think, especially as leaders, you think that you need to be strong and to not ask for help, but I think one thing I find really powerful in leaders is to, when they admit that they're, you know, struggling and they need to look after themselves as well. I think that's such a powerful thing to do. So maybe also look inwards and think about the ways that you can model good self-care yourself, because that helps everybody and it helps you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially on the end there, Lisa, in terms of like that leadership of being the change and be the example, because I know certainly in practice I've seen where perhaps the clinical directors or the senior vets will work through their breaks and eat and go, and yep, sometimes that is almost so that somebody else can have a break. But I'm sure it happens, and I've seen it again with head nurses saying, you know what, I'll work through my breaks so that you can have a break. But actually those are the ones that should be saying, look, I'm having a break, here's my break, I'm going to work through so you can have a break, making sure we all end up taking those breaks. And I think on the topic of breaks as well, because that was part of the question too, of like saying, actually being able to say no to things and knowing when to say yes to opportunities and things. For me, certainly, I think that making those decisions is on like a day-by-day basis as much as a long-term basis. Like, okay, am I putting myself first to actually try and schedule at least a little break in practice? And I know I'm real, guys, I've been in practice as well. I've seen the really hectic days where you're like, and where's that going to happen? But it's better taking those little steps every day rather than what I'll tell you I did and didn't work for a very long time of just career through 2 weeks, crash for a weekend, career through another 2 weeks, and then crash for a weekend, and saying like, what could I hand on heart do today that's going to help recharge me, and as cheesy as it is, refill that cup a little bit so that I can move forward a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like there needs to be a sort of change in the whole workplace culture, really, isn't there, around this sort of thing? Yeah, so that everybody's thinking along those lines and not sort of being martyrs for the cause, as it were.
We need to link that belief, don't we, that, you know, you have to stay late, you have to get there early, you know, you have to work above and beyond your hours on a constant basis, and that's just not sustainable.
That's it. And you know, when I was just saying about Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, although he found that people's greatest fear as caregivers was being seen as being selfish. Their greatest weakness was sort of this martyrdom, and us feeling like we just had to give ourselves completely up to that cause. But actually, like I've said right at the beginning, everybody on this call, every nurse, every vet is so valuable, and we need to treat each other like that, but we also need to treat ourselves and be that example. Because I know that, especially going into a clinic as a locum and you go and have a break, yeah, there is sometimes that little, oh my goodness, I'm the only one having a break here, but it's some of us daring to step out and do it that is then going to, hopefully in an ideal world, in my opinion, have that bit of a ripple effect of, let's set that as being a new culture and go out and be the change and make that happen.
Yeah,
Example.
absolutely. I had a question, was sort of one of my questions really, because I know at the moment a lot of people generally are having difficulties sleeping, getting a good night's sleep, which of course goes on to affect kind of how they work the next day, and if it builds up, it just kind of gets worse and worse. So I was just wondering, we were kind of talking about switching off and winding down, but are there any specific tips that you could give for getting a good night's sleep, or kind of, I don't know, getting into a routine maybe?
I've got a couple from experience. I'm sure that Lisa will have some gems to add to it as well. But I guess, again, knowing that we are all different, but trying to set routines and trying to make it that we're setting ourselves up for success by looking at things like, okay, am I going to start winding down at bedtime? Is it that I go straight from having my laptop open to close the laptop and try and get straight to sleep? One of the biggest revelations for me personally was when I was speaking with a medical professional about it. They were saying, look, if you can't get to sleep, don't sit and fight going to sleep, get up and go and do something else. And the analogy that they kind of used was, you know, if you're trying to get a baby to sleep, you don't get really angry at them like, why aren't you sleeping?
You kind of, you do.
Yeah, I imagine you probably do, actually, to be fair, but you'd kind of just be a bit gentler, and yeah, getting up and going and doing something else for me really did help. And even if it was 10 or 15 minutes of, right, I'm going to get out of bed, stop associating bed with not being able to sleep, go downstairs, read a book for 10 minutes, come back upstairs, and trying to set the environment up for success really personally helped me. Of, look, I'm going to try and take as much tech out of this room as I can do. I'm going to try and make it that it's as comfy and as relaxing as I can. I'm maybe going to listen to like some Headspace or something before I sleep. But I know Lisa's going to have some great things to add on to that. That's just my experiences with it.
I mean, I'm really terrible at this. So if I'm having a tough time or a bit stressed, and my sleep it's the first thing that goes completely out the window. And I guess it's that thing, isn't it? So your sleep is affected by how you're doing in your mental health, how you're feeling emotionally, but also it's kind of works the other way around. So if you're sleeping badly, it also affects your mental health and your well-being, and it can become a bit of a vicious cycle. I completely agree with what you're saying about don't try and force it. You know, don't just lie there sort of looking at the ceiling like, oh, why can't I sleep? You know, if it's not going to happen, you know, it's no shame in sort of getting out of bed, doing something else and coming back to it. So you said I'd have lots of tips, but actually it's something I really struggle with. But that said, I know this is before my time, but Mind Matters sponsored a sleep series, so it's on the webinar vet, and I can send the link at some point. But this was done by Mike Scanlon, and he also did some work on mindfulness, which has just been received really, really well. And so that's on webinar vet, and I definitely recommend people to take a look at that if it's something that's kind of a tricky point. But yeah, I don't have any magic with it. I wish I did. No, one thing I will say though is sometimes when I'm not sleeping well and people say, well, have you tried having a bath? Have you tried going for a walk? Have you tried? And I'm like, oh, that's just not going to work for me. I'm just going to lie here and be miserable. So do actually try those things first. It can be easy to think, oh, it's not going to work, but try those things, and good sleep hygiene as well. So try, I do not do this, full disclosure, but you know, try and get rid of all those electronics, you know, all those basic things I'm told work. But yeah, I don't want to be a hypocrite.
Thanks for that. There's some really good tips. I must admit, I am a bit of an insomniac anyway, and I have found some of the apps that are out there with this sort of sleep stories actually quite helpful. And like you were saying, Lisa, you think, oh, it would never work, and I think, oh, this isn't working, and then the next minute I've kind of fallen asleep. So it must be doing something to help me fall asleep.
I tried those sleep stories, and it just used to, well, they worked, but it used to frustrate me that I never heard the end of the story. It's like, what happened? I'll try again. What's going to happen this time?
No, I definitely have found those quite useful, but yeah, lots of tips there, and we can put a link on the forum, can't we, Jo, or on here for the webinars?
We'll put all, any links of things that we've mentioned, we'll put it all on the forum for everybody, and we can probably put some of it on the Facebook page as well, so that we can share that and everybody can have access to them. So look out for those, because we'll share them after the webinar.
They're a really, really good series. Mike Scanlon is brilliant. So when you hear us mention like bits on mindfulness, they're a really good place to go and start learning about that, and sleep too. I've watched those a little while back, but yeah, completely recommend as well.
Are
they free webinars?
They are, yeah.
They are, perfect, yeah. Thank you.
I was just going to say the mindfulness ones in particular. I mean, we often get good feedback on the things that we're offering, but the mindfulness series, people have actually said it changed their lives, which is quite surprising, but it's just gone down a storm. It's really, really popular, so I would recommend it.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had a question from someone attending, and also it was in kind of my questions about, and this is happening quite a lot at the moment, obviously because it's a very stressful time for everybody. I'm sure for clients it can be a worrying and frustrating time if they've got a sick pet, and I'm certainly noticing this in practice, and I know Jo is as well, is that sometimes clients are just being a bit rude, essentially, and we know where it's coming from, and you don't want to take it personally, but if you're already stressed and dealing with lots of emergencies and your own stuff going on, it can be really hard not to take that home. So I was just wondering if you have any tips about that kind of thing.
I think certainly from my perspective of being in practice and seeing that firsthand as well, you'll see people that are getting very upset about something that would never normally trigger or cause a response in most circumstances. Then I'd say a lot of what you've touched on already in asking the question, Alex, is important, certainly from the way that I see it, is knowing that out there in the world there's so much stress. We never really know what's going on for somebody else. We never know the backstory, and it doesn't make it acceptable, but sometimes it makes it understandable that okay, it explains it, and maybe I know certainly I always think maybe it's reflecting on something that's going on for them rather than me, and that's what I personally will remind myself of. And then I always come back to like, okay, I'm not going to be walked all over, I'm not going to allow bad behavior, as it were, but also I'm going to just understand like where they're coming from. I'm going to be kinder to them, I'm going to act in a way that I'm proud of. And then every time, like, I'll be the same, I'll get those little thoughts pop back in of, oh, they said this and they said this, and I'll just be like, you know what, I don't know what's going on for them. We only saw the snippet of their day, like the 5 minutes of their day. There might be all sorts going on behind it, and none of that is in my control. The only thing that will be in my control will be the way that I react and I respond to it. And just that kindness piece, really, as a locum on a personal front, always meant that I was the person that they sent in with the awkward people, because I'd see through it and go, you know what, under all of that, there's probably someone that's very worried. And again, it doesn't make it right for them to treat people like that, and 100% don't think that that's cool. But for our sake, and for us to actually get that sleep at night and to be able to detach from it as going, doesn't reflect on me, I don't know what's happened through the rest of the day, I'm just going to keep like acting in a way that I'm proud of, go and speak with management if it's completely not acceptable, and so on. I don't know what else you'd add to that, Lisa. That's from my thoughts of seeing it firsthand as a locum.
Oh, absolutely. I guess the thing that I would say that I would add to that is just look out for your colleagues. If you've seen somebody be getting a hard time, do go and check in. And the other thing is that you need to create an environment where so racial abuse, you know, misogyny, those kinds of targeted, you know, abusive behaviours are not acceptable. You know, and obviously if it reaches that stage, then you need to have a think about, you know, you can suggest that the client might wish to take the services elsewhere. So just being really mindful of those things and being supportive and just creating a supportive environment for your colleagues.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd completely agree, and I think that other part to it, like you just added there, Lisa, is so important, because sometimes we can take like what I've said in the first instance and say, oh, they're all just stressed and it's okay, and that comes back to, like I was saying, it makes it understandable, but it doesn't make it always acceptable. Absolutely. And that's it, just it's not cool if someone comes in shouting and screaming and doing similar, and then they end up going forward and thinking that's okay to do. But yeah, I think really just creating that place where we are looking after each other and it's not okay for us to be treated in that way, then that's really going to help moving forward, and not taking it personally, as hard as I know that is some days as well.
Thank you.
We've had a question come in from one of the attendees that I think's quite an important question. It comes from, I guess, from a leader perspective. So do you have any tips on helping people feel positive? I feel like I'm doing a lot for my team, drawing attention to good reviews, rewards, links to mental health support as some examples, but nothing seems to work. And now it's taking an effect on that leader, and it's getting them down because they don't know what else they can do, and they just feel like their efforts aren't appreciated. So I guess it's a bit of a vicious circle really going on in practice. I can definitely empathise with that question as well. That's definitely in quite a lot of places as well. So do you have any sort of help for somebody in that position?
And this might be where Mind Matters has some good resources potentially, Lisa.
Yeah, so we don't at the moment, but one thing that we are developing is training for line managers in mental health, and that's kind of going to focus quite a lot on the Equality Act and making reasonable adjustments. So those kinds of really sort of thorny issues for line managers. But one thing I would say is sometimes, I mean, if you want to be a good leader, then, you know, it's all very well signposting people, bending over backwards to make sure and try and make them happy, and providing resources. But I guess what you can't do is make people feel positive when they're just not. And sometimes, you know, people feel rubbish because it really is rubbish, you know, and no amount of signposting or you know, or hard work on a leader's behalf is actually going to improve that. So whilst, you know, it's really admirable, and I certainly wouldn't say stop doing it, you know, don't give yourself a hard time if people are still miserable, because this is really tough. And sometimes what is really powerful in a leader is not saying, you know, here are all the ways to make you feel better. It's actually having a leader that can be there with you in the tough bits and say, yeah, this is awful, I feel awful too. You know, not always having to kind of jolly people along and pep them up. I think, you know, I really respect people that come to me and say, you know, yeah, this is hard, but you know, we can find it hard together and find a way through together. So not always feel that it's your responsibility to fix things, because it just isn't. You can't fix global.
Well, that can be exhausting in itself, can't it? Trying to do that. So
yeah, and that builds resentment as well. And you know, and when you're feeling resentful, you know, that sometimes does come across. So don't try and take it all on yourself. It's not your job to make things better for all people.
No.
I think that's really good advice, isn't it? It's just being there to listen. Listening is so important in that situation, and allowing those bad days. But also people do have to take responsibility for their own sort of emotions and feelings as well. You can't solve everything.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a really brilliant answer, Lisa, and so helpful for people out there. And I mean, I think coming back to what we said previously as well, of being the example as well of, you know, things like good self-care, and that can help. It's not like we're going to put our rose-tinted glasses on and pretend that everything's wonderful, but maybe just letting people see you take like a little bit of a break, and whilst you're encouraging them to do the same. And and lead in that way, as much as feeling like you're pushing them, but actually like, hey guys, here's me using the resources. And at some point they might be ready for using them. It might be that you just catch them at a point where, yeah, this is something that's helpful to them, and they go and look at it as well. So like Lisa said, maybe don't stop doing what you're doing, but just don't get so exhausted with like Alex was saying, trying to force a change, when actually maybe some solidarity and some support and being a leader and being the change might be more than enough at the moment. And well done you for being so considerate to your team as well.
Definitely.
We had some questions regarding students from some attendees. We had a couple, and one was sort of generally asking about, just bear with me, I'll just get it up, just sort of managing the sort of mental health as a student, but someone was specifically saying, because obviously this has been quite a tough time for students, vet students and vet nursing students, and things are constantly changing, and it's some, their future's almost a little bit unsure. I don't know if there's anything specific we could recommend for nursing students at the moment. Or does anyone have any
There were
idea?
a few comments as well, weren't there, about having to move backwards and forwards between, you know, a university and home and different accommodations, which is an extra pressure on everything else that they're having to go through at the moment.
Well, it's so tough for students right now. My heart goes out to people that are in that position. It just must be so incredibly tough. And the kind of, you know, I've been speaking to students, both veterinary and vet nursing, and just the amount of resilience they're showing, and also the desire to sort of really support each other, look after each other, has just been absolutely amazing. I've learned so much from the students and how they are kind of just getting through this awful time. It's hats off to them, really. But one thing that we're doing with My Matters is so in 2019 we had a roundtable for veterinary students, and this was a mental health roundtable. We had representatives from all the different vet schools, as well as students, so staff and students, and we all came together and talked about the things that we could be doing to improve mental health and better support mental health in vet schools. And what we intended to do was, straight after that, run another one for student vet nurses. But then there was this kind of global pandemic and things kind of got waylaid a little bit. But this is actually underway. And a really good thing about this is it's going to be held online, which is fantastic, because as you know, there's so many more training providers, because the colleges and the universities for the student nurses. So it's going to be sort of a bigger cohort. So we're organising that for kind of, well, it was meant to be early 2021. I'm aiming now for sort of middle 2021 as a bit of self-care to myself. But we're organising this, and so keep an eye out for that sort of on My Matters. And we're going to be looking for representatives from all the different unis, FE colleges, and really want to hear from nursing students what would really help them, and also from from lecturers and from staff. So yeah, so that's one thing that we're developing. It is in the pipeline. You know, we often get a hard time with My Matters that, you know, sometimes people think that the work we're doing is just for the vets. And it really isn't, but I do sort of take on board that we haven't always done enough to actually actively reach out to the nurses and say, you know, this actually is for you. We want to hear what you've got to say. So this is the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to it, and yeah, I really hope as many people as possible can come along.
Thanks, Lisa.
And I'd definitely touch on something that Lisa had just said there as well, right in the beginning. I've been speaking with a lot of students recently, and a lot of them have been vet students, because there's quite a few vet student events I've got coming up in the next few weeks. And one of the worries that keeps coming up for them a lot is, obviously there's a lot of change, which, like Lisa said, heart goes out to you all. You know, you're coping with a lot right now, and looking at what is in your control and how you can focus on what you actually do have influence or control over is powerful, because sometimes we can spend a lot of our energy trying to change things that actually we don't have any bearing over. But one of the recurrent worries that kept coming up again and again, particularly with the vet students, and I'm sure a lot of the vet nursing students will feel the same, is heartbreakingly, they feel like they're not going to be as good a vets or as good a nurses as everybody else because they've not had as much practical experience, or there's been this upheaval. But you know what? And I've had this conversation with so many of my colleagues and so many senior people in the vet world out there. We think that this cohort of vet nurses and vet students are probably going to be the best we've ever had, because, you know, you've learnt skills in resilience, empathy, change. There's so much that you've picked up on that takes years in practice to figure out, that you've had this unexpected crash course, which none of us would be frankly signing up for again if we were given the chance, but we didn't have a choice in it. And you'll be able to go straight into practice with all those things. And that is something to really focus on, because, you know, you'll all be phenomenal. And when that little voice comes in and says, oh, you've not seen enough practice, well, you'll pick practice up as you get into practice. Those other skills take much longer and you've got an A star in them already.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Katie. And, you know, woe betide the next person that says, you know, students are snowflakes or lacking resilience. I mean, woe betide them, because they're just amazing and really sort of blown me away this year.
They have. We've put a link to the BVNA webinar that was held last week for students, and there are a panel on there that we're taking questions from students and helping them in that as well. So if anybody has any sort of student specific questions, they may find it in there. So just click on that link and it will take you to that recording as well. We've got another question that's just come through, which I think is something that actually quite a lot of people are feeling. Locums have definitely had a bit of a hard time during this at the moment. And I know that two of you are regular locums, so have experienced this. But this one says, as a locum living at home with vulnerable family, I'm struggling with staying at home and therefore not earning and working, but risking an unknown workplace and therefore increasing the risks of infecting family. Is there any advice that you could give? And I guess this boils down to making sure that you're working in a locum environment that you feel is safe for you. I guess Alex and Katie, you may be able to help with this one.
Go on, Katie, sorry.
Oh, you can go for it, Alex. Honestly, I'll go after you.
Well, I was just going to say that I at the moment I'm just working in practices where I feel comfortable and where I know the line managers are putting the correct measures in place, and also taking responsibility, obviously, for myself as well. So that was all I was going to say about that, really.
I'd completely agree. Certainly at the moment, there's such a variance in terms of how much practices are doing, and that's no fault of individuals or so on, but you've got to be somewhere where you feel happy and confident that actually you do feel safe, like Alex says. And the other thing would be maybe looking out and exploring if there are any other avenues, that like home working or virtual work or similar, and just putting feelers out there, and maybe just networking in some of the larger vet groups and just finding out, is there anything that you can stay at home and work that way, if that's something that would fit your values and fit what you wanted to do too. But I think the main point really does come down to what Joe and Alex have already explained, of find somewhere that you're comfortable, that the precautions that they're taking make you feel safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Katie. So I think that's gone really quickly. I knew it would go really quickly, this session, because it's really important, and we've all got lots to talk about. We've got a final slide just to show everybody before we say goodbye. I'm just going to see if I can get that up, just to say kind of what we're up to at the BVNA. So just, and with some information on it, so just bear with me a second. Let's see if I can get that up. Oh, that one. Right, can everybody see that? Yeah, getting some nods, a few. It's just listed on here when our next sort of feel good webinar is, which is on Wednesday, the 18th of February. As Joe said, we've got BVNA coming up in May. Last year was a massive success. I'm sure this year is going to be an even bigger success. And then there's just some links there to Mind Matters and to Vet Life, and of course for Katie's website as well. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to our guests this evening. It's been fantastic talking to you all. And I think we're kind of done. Jo, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just keep everything crossed for Congress 2021. Hopefully we get something in some form of in person, but we're sort of looking at a hybrid event, so it can be online and socially distanced in person is what we're aiming for. So we are trying really hard to make that an event that we can go to and actually meet up with some people face to face as well. And all of the questions that maybe we haven't been able to answer or that have come through from Facebook, we're going to try and get put onto our members forum on the BVNA website, so that we can get some links in there, maybe some answers to you as well. And the Mind Matters website is really worth a look. There's so much on there, and it does have all of those links as well that Katie and Lisa were talking about. And thank you, both of you, for helping us this evening and sharing your thoughts and hints and tips. It's been really good.
Thanks for having us.
Brilliant.
Thank you for having us. And yeah, just everybody out there, remember how valuable you are. You're phenomenally skilled, very valuable, regardless of profession or not. But, you know, let's start treating ourselves in that way.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. And look after yourselves.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.